Hello and welcome to Telegraph Studio and Business Reporters Supporting SMEs campaign, hosted by the Telegraph Online. I'm Alistair Greener and today I'm talking to Drew Speller from Ambit. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell me a little bit more about the obligations that employers have towards their employees when it comes to driving for work.
When an employee is driving for work, an employer has the same obligations under the Health and Safety Act to ensure the health, safety and well-being of their employees. That obligation spreads across any driving that they're doing, whether it's in a company vehicle or their own vehicle. We all have training how to lift a box, how to adjust our office chair, but it's not very often perhaps that we check the vehicles that our employees are driving, even if they're company cars.
It's quite interesting you mentioned the fact that it's not just company cars and it's not just for, the sort of work that we would automatically relate to somebody who's driving for work, like a salesperson or something, but actually everybody who's got any work that's related to their driving that they do. Give me some sort of picture of what we're talking about here. So numbers of employers, organisations, employees. What's that picture looking like?
Well, as you said, I think we're all familiar with the concept of company car and white van drivers, and there are about 3 million of them in the UK. But there are also 10 to 11 million people in the UK who are driving their own vehicle for work. And it's those people who are often overlooked because the driving isn't part of the organisation, the logistics or the delivery of products or services. And that's what we've found very much in smaller companies as well. So smaller companies think that they don't need to do anything because they have a smaller number of employees. But actually the legal requirement for an organisation that has 5 employees is actually to do a risk assessment on driving for work. And it's recommended for anybody even with a smaller employee base.
Now you say it's a legal responsibility. So what kind of risks are employers running if they don't comply, if they are not looking after their employees?
The single biggest risk since the 2008 introduction of corporate manslaughter law is if an organisation is shown not to have taken due diligence to make sure that the duty of care of their employees, the directors of that organisation can be fined or even jailed. On a more tangible basis, the biggest risks are financial, operational and moral. 1 in 3 road collisions in the UK involve somebody that's driving for work. And that's costing the UK around £2.7 billion a year. And that's in the cost of uninsured or incorrectly insured vehicles, time of the vehicles being off the road and loss of income, and many other things. The other element is the reputational risk of that organisation, where that act actually allows a court to force an organisation that's not behaved as they should to publicise the fines and the story behind what's happened.
It seems like it could still be quite a task, an onerous task for an organisation to ensure that it complies in this way. Perhaps if you could give us some key elements that an organisation really needs to be aware of, what would they be?
I'd say the first element is to make sure that there is an understanding of the employees, of the expectations of them, and the responsibilities of the organisation to those employees. That could be probably best put across by having a robust policy in place, and that should be something that the employees sign up to and preferably are involved in the creation of. The second part is to understand what the level of compliance is that you need to have and to be adherent to it. And I suppose the third and most important is to recognise this isn't just a one-off tick box exercise. This is an ongoing process, and organisations and responsibilities change and evolve over time, and therefore it's important to continue to review both the policy and the actions that you have around that.
Tell us a bit more about what you do. For example, how do you help organisations ensure that they are compliant and they understand their responsibilities when it comes to their employees?
Well, we recognise that this isn't at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. There are a lot of people that don't know that they have a responsibility and certainly don't know how to meet it. So what we've done is develop an app which pulls all of those elements together. So we're able to share information that's pertinent specifically to workplace driving with a broad range of organisations. We can share the tools that we have within there that help them actually to manage those actions and to take those forward. And where it becomes a little bit more specialist, we'll involve one of our partners and bring them in so that we've got the real expert advice that we can give.
It's all very well having an app, but one of the problems that you have with individuals and driving is precisely that. It is very, very individual. So how can an organisation, even with the help of an app, actually take control to ensure that everything's going as it should?
Well, the app is there as a tool, so it helps pull those elements together, and it gives control to the person that's looking after those vehicles within the workplace. So as well as the information that they're receiving that they can share with their employees, there are the tools within there. And then also recognising that an app alone isn't the be-all and end-all, we'll also introduce elements where we feel it's necessary to help support that in real life. So through driver e-training, for example, or vehicle in-training, where the employee actually has the opportunity, where they're identified as a high risk, to be able to improve where they are.
And it's interesting you talk about that whole concept of helping drivers because they're giving information to their employer. What sort of information are they giving?
The information they're giving is entirely pertinent to making sure that their vehicle is safe and compliant and that they are legally competent to drive the vehicle. So some examples would be information for us to be able to process a driving licence check. We run periodic vehicle checks, so asking them to go and make sure that their vehicle is safe to drive, and certain pieces of information that allow us to make sure that they are both aware of what they're doing and that the employer has that information as well.
What if that information that they're giving is inaccurate?
Well, there's always a risk that the information could be inaccurate. Where we take information, we typically will check it. We'll run it across any other parties that we need to, for example. But it's a bit like any information that you're giving. The employer is asking for this information to help with safety and compliance. And if you give false information, there's only so much realistically they can do. If you take the example, somebody has a bad back and they are lifting for work and they decide when they're asked not to disclose that to their employer, it's very difficult for that employer to offer support, certainly to be liable for anything.
And one of the best ways, I suppose, of ensuring that you don't have these inaccuracies is to make sure that you're continually updating their details.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll take those details from, as I said, a range of sources. Where we can, we'll ask the actual source of data to provide that to us. So if it's information about the driver, we'll ask the driver for that information. We'll ask the organisation to update certain pieces of information. And as well as taking information, we'll also provide information back to that organisation through the app to tell them what they need to know, what they need to manage by exception, and the latest pieces of news and legislation that perhaps they ordinarily wouldn't have time to on their day-to-day job.
I mean, this all makes perfect logical sense, but to put it into perspective, could you maybe give me some examples of how your app has actually helped organisations take control of their responsibilities?
I'll give you two examples. The first is somebody we were working with. They had their employees out driving their own vehicles for customer visits, going to see suppliers and so on. And they didn't know that they had a responsibility. So using the app and the conversations that we were able to prompt through that, we were able to educate them in their responsibility. The second one, it was an organisation that had around 300 employees. And of those 300, 200 were salespeople out on the road. It actually turns out that nobody within the organisation thought they were responsible for making sure that those 200 employees were safe. And as a result, we've introduced a policy with them, and we're now taking further steps to make sure that those employees are safe.
Now, we've talked a lot today about the responsibilities that an organisation has. If you were able to sum up in, say, 3 key points, what would they be that you want employers to remember?
I think they would be that both the employer and the employee have a role to play, but that there is a responsibility for an organisation to make sure that their workforce is safe when they're on the road, and that there are tools out there to help them to be able to do that.
Well, one thing we know for sure is the level of responsibility an organisation is going to have for its employees is going to grow. So it's been fascinating finding out more about how that applies to people driving their own cars. Drew Speller from Ambit, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.